Here with me now is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. He's a Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's also on the Senate Homeland Security Committee. And, sir, you have said that these Saudi stories have been an insult to the United States. Then we just saw that the Treasury Department sanctioned these 17 individuals involved in Khashoggi's murder. Is that enough, or is the president being soft on Saudi Arabia?
You know, I think it's doubtful that in an authoritarian regime like Saudi Arabia that anything happened without the Crown Prince's support. So I think the Crown Prince in all likelihood did know of this and probably directed it. But I've been more concerned not just about the killing of the dissident. I've also been concerned about Saudi Arabia's indiscriminate bombing in Yemen and our participation supporting Saudi Arabia in Yemen. So I've been pushing very hard to say we should quit selling arms to Saudi Arabia. I think sanctioning people who are already in jail is sort of like pretending to do something, because if you sanction them who are already in jail, 5 of them are on death row, you think they really care that they've been sanctioned? I think Saudi Arabia cares about the weapons, and I also think Saudi Arabia's Air Force would not fly without replacement parts and mechanics and training for their pilots from the U.S. We stop that, you stop the war in Yemen.
Arms sales to Bahrain, a major ally of Saudi Arabia's in the war in Yemen. You have legislation. This is something that you want to push to cut off that source for Saudi Arabia. According to our reporting here at CNN, it's not expected to get through the Senate. So what can you do when you have a White House who is reticent to even criticize Saudi Arabia over the death of this journalist?
People talk about checks and balances, and under the Constitution, we really are supposed to be the ones who declare war. Congress is. We're supposed to be very, very involved, and we've advocated that power, not just to this president, but to the previous president as well. So the war in Yemen began under the previous administration and has been supported by both administrations, and yet we have the ability to stop it at any moment. So when I forced the vote today, we did lose the vote because people are sort of afraid of their own shadow, like, oh no, Bahrain will be upset. Oh no, my point is Bahrain will get the message that we're serious. Stop bombing civilians. And here's the problem. Pompeo said about 3 weeks ago that Saudi Arabia and the coalition needs to stop bombing civilian centers. In the last 2 weeks, the Saudis have bombed 200 times in Hodeidah, which is the city, the port where most of the humanitarian aid needs to come in. So food can't get in because the Saudis are still bombing civilians, even though we told them not to. And so I think we need to send them a stronger message, and that's no arms.
I want to talk to you about an issue that has gotten a lot of attention internationally. That is Asia Bibi, a Christian woman in Pakistan who, this all started when she drank out of a communal cup, and because of some vestiges of a caste system that dictated she should have waited until her neighbors, who happened to be Muslim, drank before her, this turned into an altercation that ended up with her facing blasphemy charges, then on death row for 8 years. The court is going to make a final ruling on her freedom here in the next few days. I know that you have been spearheading some efforts on this. What do you want to see here?
I've been fighting for them to free Asia Bibi. I've talked to the president about granting her asylum and refugee status here. I'm interested in talking to religious leaders in our country who will raise money to support her and her family to come over here. I'm worried that she's going to be killed. They've thrown it back to a lower court. There probably will have to be another trial. They'll probably convict her again. And if she goes through all of that, she's already spent 8 years in prison on death row, which has to be a horrific experience. I'm worried that she won't survive. The governor of her province visited her in prison early on just to be sympathetic that we shouldn't put people to death for so-called blasphemy, and they shot him. I mean, this is a crazy intolerance that we have to do better of. Many people of the faith of Islam are tolerant people and good people, but the ones who are teaching hatred of Christians, hatred of Hindus, hatred of Jews, we've got to do better. And really, some of it needs to come from the Islamic world. Pakistan needs to say, gosh, we're not going to kill Christians. I mean, this is absurd. And so I don't know what we're going to do, but we should let her we should let her come to our country. Pakistan's
another country that the U.S. has this sort of somewhat tenuous is a tenuous ally of the U.S. because it provides assistance in the region. But with that in mind, and with the significance of Pakistan to this White House, do you think you have any sympathy from the president? Do you think this can really go somewhere?
I think with Asia Bibi, I do. I think he's concerned about Christians that are oppressed around the world.
Have you talked to him?
I have talked to the president about this, and I can't characterize his position, but I know from his concern for the pastor in Turkey and working to get that pastor out that it would be consistent with what they did with the pastor in Turkey to help get Asia Bibi out, and I hope they will. But I will tell you that there's a bipartisan consensus around here that is very dangerous to the country. People say we want you to compromise, but we have been compromising on foreign policy, and the compromise is we always send weapons to everybody because we say, oh, it's the lesser of two evils. So, you know, we like Pakistan because they kind of help us sometimes in Afghanistan. They also sometimes hurt us because they fund the opposition and they fund people who actually attack us. I think we should quit selling arms to people who are not our friends. Doesn't mean we have to fight Pakistan in a war, but it means that we shouldn't be aiding and abetting the things they do. The same goes with Saudi Arabia.
The New York Times is reporting that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer ran interference on behalf of Facebook as the Senate was investigating the company for its propagation of information, false information during the election. And the Times says that Schumer encouraged other Senate Democrats not to vilify Facebook, including Senator Warner, the top Democrat on Intel. We just spoke with your colleague, Senator Hirono, who says she did not receive a message like this from Chuck Schumer. But nonetheless, do you think that this is appropriate?
You know, I think the whole Facebook thing presents a conundrum to us. It's a privately owned company. Most time conservatives, we don't want to over-regulate private businesses, but they do have sort of a monopoly on this sort of social exchange speech. So what I've been saying for a while is we need to look at the barriers to entry that government might be creating and see if we can allow them to other companies to bring up. Not the government starting other companies, but the government getting out of the way to allow competition with Facebook. I think if it gets so bad that they don't allow conservative viewpoints on Facebook, I think you will get to a point where people will leave in droves and go to other, and I think people already are. So if Facebook wants to continue to make money, and they make lots of it, I would suggest to them that they really, really advocate to let conservative opinions and not to somehow censor conservative opinions. And you know, if they become so politically correct that any kind of conservative opinion is unacceptable, if you are opposed to open borders or something, that's somehow hate speech or something, we're going to live in a world where people are eventually going to have to go somewhere else to communicate.
But just real quick before I let you go here, that Chuck Schumer doing that does not bother you?
Well, no, I mean, there's always political shenanigans going on up here, and he may have done that. I guess to me, it's the bigger picture of what do we do about Facebook? Is there a governmental role? And I really don't like the government telling companies what to do, so I'm not really in favor of like breaking up Facebook or telling them what to do. But I'm also, as a conservative or a limited government person or a libertarian, I am offended by the fact that my speech is being censored somehow or could be censored by Facebook. So Facebook, if they want to keep making money, are going to have to convince conservatives that they're not the enemy.
Senator Rand Paul, thank you, sir. Really appreciate you being on.
Thank you.